All right. Hi, my name is Perez, and I am a doctoral candidate at the University of Toledo working under Dr. Kamala London. I'm going to start using my new Zoom skills by recording our talk that I gave at APLS 2020 earlier this year in March in New Orleans. We figured we would record our talks from that conference and start disseminating them just because a lot of people couldn't make it to APLS, and a lot of the conferences we were looking forward to this summer were also canceled. So today I'll just be presenting this, which was already presented, like I said. I'll be talking to you about children's unelaborated yes/no responses in response to indirect speech acts. It's a heck of a title. By indirect speech act, I mean questions that are asking a child two questions, such as, do you remember what color the getaway car was? These questions ask the child explicitly if they know or remember the information, and implicitly what that information is. So as I will discuss today, one of the problems with asking these questions is that an unelaborated yes or no response that the child provides could be ambiguous, especially if the implied question that is being asked is asking a yes or no question. So we know that in cases of child maltreatment, the eyewitness accounts that children provide are vital pieces of evidence. Therefore, us as researchers and investigators should work together to ensure that the way we question children helps them provide the most elaborative and accurate information that they can provide. Best practice guidelines recommend that we use open-ended questions when interviewing kids because they prevent introducing interviewer bias into the interview and throwing children off that way. And we also know that previous research has found that various question types can negatively impact children's accuracy and elaborativeness, therefore damaging their credibility as a witness. So recently, researchers have begun investigating the use of indirect speech acts, such as do you remember questions with child witnesses. As I discussed earlier, a question like, do you remember what color the getaway car was, asks a witness explicitly, do you remember? And implicitly, what color was the getaway car? So these questions are thought to be less suggestive because instead of presuming that the child has this information, they first probe for whether they know or remember that information. However, we know that kids do struggle with these types of questions. So across 2 lab studies, Evans and colleagues looked at children's performance on do you know questions that were asking an implicit WH question. And they found that children did provide a number of unelaborated yes responses to these questions. So these findings are concerning for 2 reasons. First, when a child is giving an unelaborated yes response to a question that implicitly asks a WH question, they may be seen as uncooperative. So if you ask a child, do you remember what color the getaway car was, and they say yes, and that's it, that comes off as them having that information but not wanting to share it with you for whatever reason. Alternatively, if the question is asking a yes/no question and they give an unelaborated yes or no response, it's really unclear whether they're answering the yes, I remember, or yes, blank, whatever is being asked of them. And we also know that attorneys frequently ask these types of questions to children in court, but they frequently fail to follow up and clarify whether the child was answering the literal or the implicit question. So in the present study, we examined differences in the proportion of unelaborated yes or no responses children gave to 5 different types of do you remember questions, which I'll talk about in a few slides. Participants in the present study were 65 children ages 4 to 10 years old, recruited from child care centers and a science museum in a mid-sized Midwestern city. The participants in our sample were predominantly female and predominantly white. For the purposes of today's talk, we did create 3 age groups, ranking children from youngest to oldest in our sample, and creating 3 equal groups of 22 children per group. For the our manuscript, which we currently have in preparation right now, we will be treating age continuously. So children participated in a single 30-minute session with an undergrad research assistant. So first they watched a short cartoon video about two cartoon characters looking for their missing dog. And next they completed two individual difference measures, a meta-memory task and a handedness task, which was used as a proxy measure of lateralization in the brain. I won't get into these too much, especially the meta-memory task, because my collaborator, Christina Todorovic, already has a talk on this, which I think she will be recording and uploading. And then after these two individual difference measures were completed, they were interviewed by that same RA about their memory for the cartoon video. So like I said, children were interviewed individually about their memory for that cartoon video immediately following the individual difference measures. And in the first part of the interviewer covered basic ground rules, such as saying, I don't know, and asking questions if they don't understand, and not guessing any answers. And then children were asked 25 questions about the cartoon video. On the next slide, I'll break these down in depth. Question type was counterbalanced across 8 interview versions, and within each interview version, we randomized question order. So let me break down the 25 questions that children were asked. Children were asked 10 WH questions about the video, half asked about true details that did occur in the video, and half asked about false details that did not occur in the video. And then they were asked 10 yes/no questions, again, half about true details and half about false details. And finally, children were asked a set of 5 unanswerable questions regarding details not mentioned in the video at all, so they would be completely unanswerable. Then across all question types, half were presented directly and half were presented in this do you remember format, where they were prefaced with the do you remember prompt. For the purposes of today's talk, we're only going to be talking about these do you remember questions because unelaborated yes/no responses were pretty rare across the WH and unanswerable questions anyways. For coding, 2 undergrad research assistants, blind to the child's age and the purposes of the study, individually coded whether children's responses were unelaborated. It's important to note that for the do you remember WH and do you remember unanswerable questions, only unelaborated yes responses were counted because an unelaborated no response would indicate no, I don't remember. And here at the bottom, there's an example of what we would count as an unelaborated response. So for the ease of interpretation today, I converted all these proportions to percentages. And we saw a main effect of question type where across all ages, children provided significantly more unelaborated responses to do you remember yes/no questions. Then we also saw a significant age by question type interaction, wherein younger children were significantly more likely to provide unelaborated responses, particularly to these do you remember yes/no questions. And it is important for me to note that in the manuscript that we are currently writing up for publication, we are treating these WH and yes/no questions separately in our analyses, but for the purposes of today's presentation, we include them in a single repeated measures ANOVA. So we found overall that children provided significantly more unelaborated responses to questions that were implicitly asking a yes/no question. So this is unsurprising given that the implicit question itself is seeking a yes or no response, whereas WH or unanswerable questions are asking for more elaborate answers. And we also found a significant interaction between age and question type, where younger children were the ones who were most likely to provide unelaborated responses to do you remember questions, particularly these do you remember yes/no questions. Overall, our findings suggest that interviewers and attorneys really should be careful when using these types of questions, especially when the question is implicitly asking a yes no response, because it's very unclear and ambiguous what the child means when they provide an unelaborated response. And we know the biggest danger of assuming what the child meant when they provide an unelaborated response is that it could lead to more suggestive questioning, because if the child just continues to go along with the interviewer's incorrect assumptions, that could kind of get out of hand and prevent us from getting accurate testimony from them. So for some future directions, future work should examine whether children's unelaborated responses, especially to yes/no questions, are meant to answer the explicit "do you remember" question or the implicit question being asked of them. For the present study, we do have some preliminary analyses available now where children in our study, once if they did provide an unelaborated response, for example, do you remember if Scooter was wearing a leash? If the child said yes, the interviewer would follow up with yes, you remember, or yes, Scooter was wearing a leash. And they would do it for each of these instances in the interview. And we were able to get a kind of idea of whether kids had a pattern of answering the literal or the implied question. And from our analysis, we found that when kids provided unelaborated yes or no responses to yes, no questions about true details, 9% of their unelaborated responses were meant to answer the literal "do you remember" question. But when it was a "do you remember" yes, no question about a false detail, this jumped up to 19%, so almost 1/5 of children's unelaborated responses were actually meant to answer the explicit "do you remember" question. So that's a huge jump, and that's problematic because in real life settings, we see that attorneys aren't doing this follow-up. And some recent research by Wiley et al. Found that adults just generally don't pick up on why these unelaborated responses could be ambiguous and unclear. And future work finally should examine these developmental trends, given, if you look back on the last slide, these really steep developmental trajectories we have. We should really work on identifying what sort of mechanisms are underlying these. So some possible cognitive underpinnings that we are proposing could lay in the development of language. So particularly the development of skills related to receptive language or the understanding of language, and also pragmatic understandings, the understanding of what is being said versus what is really being meant. So thank you for watching this. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at my email here or via Twitter, anything like that. And I want to say special thanks to all our research assistants who helped out with coding and data collection, and Dr. Stephen Chrisman at the University of Toledo for his help in getting all our materials ready for this. So thank you.